Hello, my fellow comic book collectors. Today is Wednesday, and it's your chance to get your questions answered from last week. So every week on Wednesday, I will answer your questions, whatever questions that it may be. You guys always ask me some good ones. So today I answer the ones that were given to me last week, and they're really good questions this week. So I'll get into it. One of these questions I will actually not answer today, which is kind of sounds weird, but I will answer it tomorrow's video, and it's going to be a very special video dedicated to one question. So you'll see that, and I'll read the question in this video though. Okay, so first question. Oh, just so you know, these questions are from the video that I posted last week. Also, they are from my Instagram. So if you want to ask me a question on Instagram, you go to Comic Collector Geek on Instagram, and you can ask me a question there, and I will answer it as well. So you can go here or there. Okay. So first question is from Richard Lishira, and he wrote, "The institution of the Comic Code Authority meant the downfall of horror comic genre in the 1950s. It was self-regulatory. By the Bronze Age, it appears that the authority loosened up on the censorship of these later horror books. Were there written guidelines published somewhere that can be examined today, or were there some unwritten rule that can't be shown in the comic? It would be interesting to see how the 1950s covers changed right after the institution of the code. Was there a specific month and year when this went into effect for all companies? If so, did some companies immediately cease publication once the mandate was in effect?" You did request questions. Okay, so that was his question. So I want to give you a bit of a quick early introduction to the history, and then I will sort of address all of those sub-questions. So here's the Seduction of Innocent. And I want to give you a sense of how fast all of this kind of happened. So this book came out in the spring of 1954, okay? So spring 1954. Then by April, so not much later, still spring, they had the Senate hearings, the first Senate hearings in New York. And that was in April, end of April, like April 21st to 22nd. Then they had a next set of Senate hearings in June of 1954. So by June, they realized that things are not going well. And that's where, like I mentioned before in a previous video, the crime suspense comics, the one right there, that one was the one that kind of really caused a stir. There was a big news, like they mentioned it in the Senate hearings, and all of a sudden, you know, they could see the writing was on the wall. Either there was going to be a government censorship of the comics, or they were going to have to self-regulate. So all the comic guys got together, and they basically created this Comic Code Authority. And the Comic Code Authority, or the Comics Code as it was kind of nicknamed, basically what it did was it would said, if your comic does not have the code on it, it cannot go through the normal distribution channels. So you could still publish comics all you want, like crazy, whatever you want, but you wouldn't be able to use the distribution channels. So you couldn't get it on the newsstands, okay? There was an exception to that rule, and the exception worked in this way. If your comic was not a comic, if it was a magazine, then you could still distribute it the same way, because magazines were targeted to adults and comics were targeted towards kids. So you could, a lot of publishers like EC, you know, it really stopped a lot of its stuff. It stopped pretty much everything except Mad Magazine. And Mad Magazine acted as a satire, and it really did address a lot of this stuff. And it, because it was a magazine, it was still able to distribute through the normal channels. And it did really well. Actually, William Gaines actually made more money with Mad than he had done with the other stuff. So he actually did quite well. But a lot of publishers went out of business almost overnight because they just couldn't, manage this new Comic Code Authority. And what it was there was a set guidelines. It's not like this was just some arbitrary thing. There was 41 regulations that they had to abide by. And some of the regulations were pretty simple. Like one is like you're not allowed to use certain language as your comic title. For example, you're not allowed to use the word weird, eerie. There was certain words that were not allowed. And those, so if you think about it, a lot of those words were the ones that were the titles for EC comics. So it really kind of hit EC the hardest, actually. And it turned out that so a lot of this comic code was really to crack down on sexual explicit stuff. You couldn't have things like, also you couldn't have certain Halloween elements. Even Halloween itself was kind of sketchy. Like there was like sort of people that could kind of bend the rules. There was certain things you're not allowed to show, and there was a bunch of rules basically. And I'm not sure if I find the link to where you can read all these rules, I will link it in the description. But I don't know where you can find it offhand, tell you the truth. But I did look at the Wikipedia page. There is a Wikipedia page about the Comic Code Authority. It doesn't list the rules. So it doesn't list all the rules. Okay, so next part of that is, well, most people don't even realize this, but not all comic companies abided by the Comic Code Authority. And there was three major standouts. One was Dell. So Dell 4-Color, it never used the Comic Code Authority, but it still managed to continue on printing. Western Comics also never. So Western is another publisher, never adopted the Comic Code Authority. Another one that didn't adopt it, and it's kind of a major one, is Classics Illustrated. It's major because Classics Illustrated was actually referenced in the Seduction of Innocent multiple times. So it's kind of interesting that they never adopted the Comic Code Authority either. Now, the first comics with the Comic Code Authority came out in March of 1955. So the Comic Code Authority was created in September of 1954, but it took a few months before they actually started implementing it, and you got that stamp that appeared on the comics. So any comics from like February of 1954 did not have the Comic Code Authority on it, the seal. So, for example, I'll show you. This is Wonder Woman number 72. Okay, so this, you can see, no code, no stamp. And this was the last Wonder Woman issue. This is from February of 1955. This was the last issue that didn't have the code. Now, if you look at this one, which is the next issue of Wonder Woman, but this came out in April. So March, they didn't have an issue of Wonder Woman, and they didn't have an issue until this one, which is in April. This one had the Comic Code Authority stamp. And the early stamps, the collectors of the 80s kind of comics would recognize the stamp as being much, much smaller, or 70s, 80s, Bronze, Silver Age comics. Generally, the stamp is much smaller. But this is what's considered to be an atomic age. It's sort of in between that golden age and silver age. There's sort of this weird little era of comics, and this is considered to be atomic age. It had the seal, and it was very large. They really, really wanted you to know that this had the Comic Code Authority. So it's kind of really big. They really stuck it on there. So so it was actually many years later that people started kind of rebelling against the Comic Code Authority. And one of the first comics that did that was with Stan Lee. Stan Lee wanted to publish something like during the 70s, and this is like 1971 era, so this is many years later. Um, there was a real problem with drugs, and there was a real concern about drugs and the effects that they were having on like potentially young people that read comics. And they kind of wanted to do like almost like a public service message to really address the problems with drugs. And so Stan Lee actually went to the Comic Code Authority. And one of the issues with the Comic Code Authority was you were not allowed to mention drug usage. Like that was forbidden. No drugs in comics. So he wanted to do his drug issue and they wouldn't approve it. They said, nope, you can't publish that comic with our seal. So he went out. He went without it. So this is Spider-Man 96, and this is the drug issue, where basically Spider-Man didn't have the Comic Code Authority on it. And it was the first kind of comic that really rebelled against the Comic Code Authority and went, counter to having to use the Comic Code Authority. They later readapted the Comic Code Authority with Spider-Man, but there was a few issues where they didn't have that seal. But it sort of led to the cracks that kind of was bringing down the Comic Code Authority. Because during the 70s, people kind of started pushing back more and more against the Comic Code Authority. And DC followed suit. It had its Green Lantern drug-related issues. And, they basically pushed against it. Now, it wasn't until 2001 that Marvel finally said, no, we're not going to do the Comic Code Authority anymore. They just removed the stamps altogether. And then in 2010, Bongo Comics, not a big publisher, but it's still a fairly prolific one. In 2010, they removed the stamp, and then in 2011, in January, so not much later, DC and Archie both removed the Comic Code Authority from their books. So basically, you got that being the end of the Comic Code Authority. And after 2011, pretty much no comics, there was no comics that actually abide by the Comic Code Authority at that point. And we now have a new golden age where we, have a bit of freedom. Still the publishers will, have some discretion in terms of what they put out in their comics. But that's really the history of the Comic Code Authority and some of the little bits of history in there as well. So I hope that was interesting. The next question, I don't know why, but this week's, I don't know, like not a complaint about the questions, but all of them, they're really testing my reading skills. They're these really long questions. I'm not sure why. I'm just saying, just a comment. But the next one is from Mike Sweetentel. I have a question for you for your next show. Will cleaning comic books end up like cleaning coins? Okay? And then he writes this big long thing and he talks about... I don't feel like reading all this, to tell you the truth. It's just such a long question. He was talking about how CGC holders actually can, over time, tarnish the comics. And it used to be this case with coins as well, that people used to clean the coins and you would get almost like a weird tarnishing effect that couldn't happen. I remember as a kid, I loved collecting pennies, so I'm sort of addressing this question. Where what I would do is I would use like sort of like a very, very mild acid on my coins, okay? And I didn't do this much because I realized it was kind of damaging the coins, but what you could do is you could dip the coin into like just a very mild acid, and it would just remove that very fine layer off the top of the coin. So with a penny, it basically took a penny that was brown and made it very shiny, like a brand new penny look. And it was kind of cool. But it's not something that was good, because what it would do is also it would maybe kind of downgrade the coin in a way, because it would remove a little bit of the finesse of that coin. So the question becomes, well, how all the stuff that we're doing with comics, is it kind of similar to that, right? Where we're pressing the comics, we're cleaning the comics. Well, some cleaning is already considered bad. So if you use chemicals that can be detected, that's the key word, then you can actually get flagged as having restoration. Um, some comics will actually have that on the restoration thing, that it was cleaned as a restoration note, that you can actually, when they actually check for restoration, they will smell the comic, and they can smell that the very distinct chemical smell that is used to sometimes remove the browning and the staining, foxing. There's chemicals you can use to remove that, and that will get you flagged as having a restored comic. But there are tricks. I actually recommend you check out a channel called Jerry the Jitterbug, and check out Jerry's channel. He does a really good thing where he takes restored comics and unrestores them, I guess. He makes them either conserved or get a blue label. And he will actually do techniques where you cannot smell that that cleaning. Okay, so I recommend checking out his channel. But the point is, if you do certain things like that, you will get flagged. Pressing is one of those things that that generally is really hard to detect. It's it's obvious that some of these comics have been pressed because they're so flat, but it's one of those things that I think is legitimate. I mean, pressing actually happens naturally with comics. And what I mean by that is if you lay a bunch of comics all together, okay? And this is how spine rolls actually happen, where if you stack a bunch of comics all together, and what'll happen is they'll actually naturally press the comics, the ones at the bottom. And what'll end up happening is if you do that and they're all stacked with all the spines, because the spine is slightly thicker than the rest of the book, because it has the staple in it, it's a little bit thicker. What'll happen is you'll actually create, just through the pressing of the comics from their natural weight, a spine roll. And that, is a bad thing. But the point is, pressing can happen naturally. And for graders to basically say that that is a flaw in terms of restoration, it wouldn't make sense, because we store our comics sometimes as stacks, and that's very normal. So I think certain things will always be considered legitimate. So pressing probably is one of those things that purists might not like, but it's one of those things that can happen naturally, and I think it's very legit. It's one of those things that can be very dangerous too, right? You can mess up pressing. You can destroy a comic through pressing. So, it's one of those things that comes with risk. But what else can I say? But most cleaning that most people do, when I actually did clean a few of my comics, what you do is you don't use chemicals, and all you're doing is generally removing dirt. And I think that's legitimate. We do that with coins as well, where you don't necessarily use chemicals, but you use cotton swab or something very, very mild to basically just remove any dirt from the coin, or in this case, comics. So I think all of that is legitimate. So I hope that answers the question. And there's lots of techniques. And as I said, watch Jerry's channel, Jerry the Jitterbug, and double shout out for him, because his channel is great, and he really gets into the whole restoration and cleaning process. Okay, next question. Comic Samurai. Comic Samurai writes, "That was fun," referring to my previous video. "Thank you for answering my question. It leads me to another one. Do you have any rules that you try to follow when buying graded comics? I ask because one of my rules is that I have to have a reader /raw copy before I'll buy a graded one. My two other rules are I try to buy a 9.2 or higher, and I'd love to have the and that I love and sorry and that I have to love the cover. So if you get a graded comic, that's one thing that I actually kind of want to address is that when you grade a comic, you basically can't read that comic anymore. So his rules are he wants to have that reader comic so he can still read the comic and get that feeling of the reading. Um, but he also only grades it when it's got a really great cover. And that's actually something that I actually believe collectors are going to be doing more and more of, where they're going to want whatever character it is that they really like. Like, so there's first appearances and then there's first cover appearances. And I think people are going to gravitate more to those first cover appearances because, it's kind of visual. Once it's in the slab, you can't open it up to see that first appearance. So it's more important now to have a cover that you really enjoy in that slab and one that features the character that you're actually seeking, right? So I really do see that as important. Now, in terms of me, what do I look for in graded comics? I don't have those rules because I read my comics online half the time. Most of the time, I do not read my actual physical comics because I'm very paranoid about touching and mangling my comics. But I do read some, and I do sometimes use readers. I have reader comics that I'll read, but for the most part, I like slabbed comics for presentation. So I generally will pick comics that I love, like it has like some cool first appearance in it, or it has some really great cover. Like I buy, just pure cover art. There's lots of good girl art that kind of fits that. Like I look behind me, and there's a lot. There's just I'll never read these comics. Like it might be a great comic. This is a good example. So this is good girl art, beautiful cover. I will probably never read this issue. Maybe I'll read it. I should never say never, but the point is, like, I just love the cover, and it's a cover by. It looks great in the slab. The slab protects it, so I like that. I like having it in the slab where I can showcase it. So generally, I don't have like a strict grade that I want. I prefer it to be above a 3 generally, but with the golden age, it's really, really hard to get those grades that high in a way because it gets really, really pricey very quick after a 3. So sometimes I have to kind of compromise where I get a little bit lower grades, like a 2 or even a 1 or even a 0.5, just because it just becomes unattainable in terms of price. You got to pick your battles in terms of what you buy. But I do try to get, when I buy slabs, comics where the front cover is very solid. Even if it's a 0.5, it has to have, like, I try to pick comics where there's not missing chunks out of them, or it's very, it looks very presentable, even if it's a low grade. I don't care if the back cover is mangled, but the front cover has to be good because it's what we see, right? So there's a few comics that I have where literally the front cover is solid, beautiful front cover. The back cover is ripped in half. And it presents really well. It's a 0.5 grade only because it's missing so much of the back. But it looks really well. It can look like, if you didn't see the back, it could look like a 7 or, like a really high grade. So I like looking for those opportunities when I buy slabbed comics. So that's my rules, I guess. I just, based on what I like to collect. Okay, so the next question. Actually, I already answered this one with him in a previous thing, but it's again from Mike Swindell. My question about Catwoman number 9 from the 1994 series. I'm seeing on the cover Catwoman fighting Tarot of the Black Rose character, but I do not think she officially exists yet, and I think she is called something else in the comic. But that's her face, her butterfly mask, etc. What do you think? Did uh, Balin sneak one in on us? So I'm going to show you that comic, and you'll see what he's talking about. So the character is called Zephyr, and this is her first appearance in Catwoman number 8. So this is her. She's got like the butterfly mask, lots of sexy legs. Jim Balent is kind of known for really, really sexy female characters. And you can even see that with Catwoman. I loved his Catwoman. I thought she was very sexy, kind of skin tight clothes, like these really high boots, just really sexy Catwoman. And so this character kind of looks, she has the red hair, butterfly mask. Okay, so that's key. And the one that he's referring to is this one. Okay, so she's got the red hair. Just keep that in mind. And the butterfly mask and this kind of sexy pose. Now, this is from 1994-95 era. Tarot, which is another series that I really love, she didn't come out until 2001. And I'll show you what Tarot looks like. So this is number 1. I actually have 2 copies. So this is her. She has like the butterfly mask, the red hair, and even the colors. So you'll notice that Zephyr's costume is yellow. It's a yellow dress. And you'll notice that, again, with Tarot, she's got this yellow. Again, very similar style. Well, not quite, much more sexy, I would say, but very similar, okay? And also one other thing that's interesting about Tarot is you'll notice she has a cape. I'm not sure if you can see that, but she has a cape. And you'll notice the same with Zephyr. She has this like a bluish cape, blue-gray cape. I'm not sure if you can see that, but so many elements, very, very similar, okay? So what I think happened was he probably loved the Zephyr character, and he basically was inspired by her. So this is like 6 years later. He's still thinking about that Zephyr character he made, and I think it inspired him to make Tarot. So this is one copy of number 1. This is the variant, or I'm not sure which is the variant, but this is the other copy. So you can see all the elements there. I mean, definitely there's some differences in Zephyr versus versus Tarot. Tarot has a bit more assets, I guess. Her boobs are a bit bigger, and she's a lot more fleshy. Like, a lot less clothing actually covering her. So, and her hair is curled, whereas Zephyr's hair is very straight. So, a little bit of changes, but very similar overall. So, I think that there was inspiration there from the previous. So I think that's a great question. I think it's interesting to see how artists will kind of bring back their own artwork or characters that they love and maybe reuse them in a new way. So I think there is that was a very good observation from Mike. Okay. So with all that being said, let's get on to the next question. Okay, next one is from Comic Mag Musings. Okay, Canadian crooner. Here's another question. Do you collect comic-related items like comic trading cards, action figures, statues, models, toys, and etc.? Okay, yes, I do, but not really. Not actively. I'm not like hunting like a whole bunch of cards or a whole bunch of things or anything like that. But I did collect certain ones where I did kind of do that, and I'll show you what I mean. So when I collected my Warren publishing stuff, I really, I wanted to get not just all the magazines from from Warren. I wanted to get all of their toys and paraphernalia. So I have all the posters. I have this doll, this like a little statue, like from Aurora. I believe it was 99 cents originally. It'd be great if you could get it for 99 cents today. But it has like the little bat, and it's like very plasticky. It's kind of nice though. This one I had painted professionally, so it's quite cute. I really like it. I also have more Vampirella. This is from Vampirella from Harris Publishing. This is where they, produce the little models. And I like Vampirella a lot, so I have a couple models from her. I actually have on order a statue of Zombie Tramp, another character I really like. So that's one that I'm really looking forward to. Other things that I have, and I'll show it, is because I as I said, I collected pretty much everything Warren related, and I have these kind of wallets. These are like little leather wallets with like Frankenstein and Dracula. And like there's a whole bunch of different ones. And then Quasimodo and the werewolf. These are wallets. I never bent them, so they would bend normally. And they actually came with these kind of things that you'd put inside. Oh, oops, as I drop it all. So they came with these kind of like folders that you'd put inside the wallets. Now these are reproductions that were from Dynamite, which is a later publisher of Warren magazines, but they're still kind of cool. What's up here? Pick that up. So those are some of the things that I collected, but I also collected the masks. So another company called Ben Cooper, they would produce like Halloween masks, and they produced Uncle Creepy. So these are two different variations of the Uncle Creepy masks. These would be from the early, like late 60s, early 70s. So it's quite rare to find these because often they would crack, and these are like in mint condition. So it's kind of rare to find them. Very hard to find masks. So those are some of the toys that I collected. And I have a lot more, but I also collected puzzles. Like they would come out with these kind of puzzles with the different covers. So this is Creepy. And this one's a really rare one. This is never been opened, so it's in mint condition. Vampirella giant size one. So this is really rare. Like I've only seen it once advertised or sold on eBay, and I picked it up basically. So this is like a really rare puzzle. This is from like the early 70s. And then we got one more, another Eerie, and this is just an Eerie cover. And these are kind of cool. So these were from Milton Bradley. So these were kind of cool. So so those are some of the items that I collect, and I have all the posters too. So I have a bunch of posters, and they're all stored up above me. So I collected a bunch of stuff, and I still, if there's something that's kind of cool, I'll collect it. I'll give you one more example. This is one really weird example. I'm a big Wonder Woman fan, so McDonald's came out with like the little action figures, like the little stuffed plushies, I guess they're called. And this is Wonder Woman. I didn't open the bag because I'm like, I really like to keep it in the mint condition kind of thing. So yeah, a little plushie. So I like those kind of things. I like these little toys and stuff. So those are some of the things that I collected. Okay. And the last question, and this is the question I'm not answering today, is from Rocket Fighter 8. And Rocket Fighter 8 wrote, what are your 10 most expensive comic book purchases, and how much have they increased in value? Does your wife know, and does she watch your videos? So tomorrow's video, I will answer that question. I will show my top biggest comic purchases. So tomorrow's video is going to be a big one. These are the biggest purchases, and I'll tell how much I spent, and I will tell you how much they are worth now. And you'll be surprised how much I spent and how much they're worth now. It's pretty crazy. And fortunately, my wife does not watch my channel. She has zero interest in watching my channel. And that is very fortunate, because there would be so many complaints about, you spend that on comics. I'm the breadwinner in the family, so I kind of have a little bit of slack when it comes to buying stuff. So yeah, she gives me a bit of leeway. So it's my money to play with a bit. And it's only recently where I kind of went a little crazy with buying stuff. So I think she's been very forgiving in terms of me buying so many crazy books. So yeah, that's tomorrow's video. So stay tuned. Remember, if you have a question that you want answered in next week's video, then this is the time to ask. Put it in the comments below, or ask me on Instagram. So thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks again.